Right. Welcome to our Senior Moments program today. Our presenter is Susan DeVries, an assistant professor in biology department at UW-Whitewater. Susan has performed research with Cardinals for the last 15 years and is a co-author on the Birds of the World species account for the Northern Cardinal. Today, she will be discussing what makes cardinals so popular and how to attract this charismatic species to your yard. And I think this is going to be just so much fun. And welcome, Susan. Thank you so much. I'll let you take it over.
Thank you, Maureen. Let me go ahead and share my file with folks. Okay. All right, so welcome and thanks again for that introduction, and thank you to all who might be listening to hear our little chat about why Northern Cardinals are worth all the attention that they receive. So, to give you a little context about my experience with this species, I became interested in vertebrate research as an undergrad at the University of Louisiana at Lafayette. I am a Louisiana native, so if you're trying to figure out where that accent is from, there you go. I began working with animal behavior in mammals at the University of Arkansas at Little Rock for my master's degree. And while I was there, I had the opportunity to see a research presentation about territorial behavior in cardinals, and I was absolutely hooked. I had to learn more. So I've worked with cardinals ever since. At the University of Southern Mississippi, I began my PhD work with them, and I've worked with them for over the last 10 years. What brought me to the Midwest was a postdoctoral fellowship at UW-Madison, where I took a little bit of a hiatus from cardinals. I worked with European starlings for a little while, and while I had a really good time, I really felt like my heart just belonged with the cardinal. So once I got my current position at UW-Whitewater, I began to resume my research with them, and I'm having a blast. And whenever we think about cardinals, one of the things we often think about is, oh my gosh, they're everywhere. We see them everywhere. We see them even in locations where you wouldn't expect them. And it's easy to see why we're drawn to them, because they are an extremely charismatic species. It's got an extremely cheery color. It's got a beautiful song, and it is very willing to live alongside humans because, well, we provide them actually pretty ideal habitat. This is a beloved bird by lots of avian enthusiasts. It resides throughout most of the United States and is a popular visitor to bird feeders. So any of you who have bird feeders have most surely seen a cardinal taking a sunflower seed there from time to time. It is also the state bird for 7 states in the country. And of course, it is the mascot for many high schools, colleges, and even a few professional athletic teams. How many of us probably own something resembling a cardinal right now? I'm looking around in my home and I can automatically see about half a dozen different things, including the whiskey decanters that are proudly being displayed in my office from the coffee cup which I used this morning. So let's talk a little bit about this truly fascinating species that we're really lucky to have outside our back door. So with regards to the cardinal's distribution, they're among the most abundant species on the continent, and they're very broadly distributed in eastern and central portions of the country, even into portions of the southwestern part of the United States. We see them creeping into southern Canada because their range is ever expanding, and we see them extending southward into northern Central America. These are resident birds, meaning that they're going to be here year-round. They are non-migratory, and everywhere that they've been introduced, cardinals do pretty well. They have been introduced in Hawaii, they've been introduced in Southern California, and Bermuda, for example, and these introduced birds actually didn't have a hard time establishing small populations within these new locations. I often talk about the cardinal as being a survivor species, and it's because it's figured it out how to survive with our rapidly changing landscape. So cardinals really like edge habitat, okay, really like edge habitat. And this edge habitat is going to be where we see two different types of habitat coming together, all right? So for example, if we have a tree line next to an open field, that is going to be an edge habitat. And cardinals really take advantage of that because it's going to have dense foliage for nesting, which is really important, and it will also have abundant trees for singing perches. Okay, and I know we've all seen a beautiful cardinal up in the top of a tree singing his little heart out or her little heart out because both sexes of this species sing. So the distribution range for this species is actually getting ever increasing. I briefly mentioned that a couple seconds ago. And it's been ever expanding since about the mid 1800s. It can easily take advantage of slight changes in temperature. It loves having food availability at bird feeders. If you have a bird feeder out, chances are you're going to have a cardinal visit it at some point. In the state of Wisconsin, the species was actually pretty rare in the early 1900s. However, it has expanded into our most northern counties by the mid 1980s. And now we start to see the species making its way into southern Canada. So this is definitely a survivor species. We fully expect this expansion range to continue northward and westward as the years progress. So let's talk a little bit about the first thing that comes to mind whenever we think about a cardinal, and you probably think about the word red. And that's exactly what you probably should be thinking about because they are one of the few truly bright red birds that we have in the United States. We do have a few red migrants such as tanagers that come through, but the cardinal is here year round, and that bright red plumage puts a smile on our face, especially in the wintertime here in Wisconsin. So this is going to be one of the most striking features for this species, and in fact, it's actually named for the male's red plumage. However, if you've seen a male, you know that, well, females don't necessarily look like the males, and they are strongly dichromatic, as the males are going to be that bright, bright red, but those females are going to be primarily a grayish tan color. And what a lot of folks don't realize is that the females actually have a little bit of red on them too. You'll see red on their wings, as we see in this illustration here. We'll see them sometimes on the tips of the crest. We'll see them on the tail. And sometimes in some birds, females will have a little bit of red over their eyes, almost giving them like they have an eyebrow appearance. Okay? A lot of people have asked before, well, where does the red come from? The red plumage actually comes from the bird being capable of taking pigments from food and converting it into that nice red color, okay? So the red plumage is going to come from ingesting food that has a pigment inside of it called carotenoids, okay? Then the bird will go through a metabolic process in which those carotenoid pigments will then be converted into that red coloration. Carotenoids give us lots of different colors in nature. In addition to red, they give us oranges, they give us yellows, and we'll talk about an instance in which we have seen some yellow cardinals at the very end. All right, so the red and orange colors in the Northern Cardinal are basically going to be an example of how efficiently they are able to convert those carotenoids obtained from their diet and how well they can deposit them into their feathers, okay? Most of this process is going to occur when the bird is going through molt. So molt is a process that is very important for all birds, in which they will be getting rid of their old feathers and they're going to make new ones, okay? This particular time in which the bird does this from a physiological perspective is crucial for if that bird is going to be a very red bird or not. And what that means is that the food that birds eat when they are molting, okay, is going to basically indicate how red those feathers will be once the bird has completed molt. So when those nice new little young feathers are being created, whatever carotenoids are available in the bird at that point in time, based on what it's eating, is going to determine how red that bird is going to be after those feathers have been developed and the bird has completed molt. Okay, so it's very possible that a bird that was not very bright red in the spring is suddenly the brightest bird you've ever seen in the winter, because during that fall molt, they had a really good diet full of carotenoids, and they were able to put those pigments into those new feathers that made them nice and pretty. Okay, we can also look at the nice black mask that both sexes have. Males and females have that nice mask that goes around the bill and up to the eyes. It can change throughout from year to year, just as the red pigment availability in the feathers can change. The black, however, does not come from carotenoids. Instead, it comes from a pigment called melanin, and that is going to be independent of diet. And there have been some suggestions that perhaps the face mask of these individuals could be based more on a genetic impact. Whenever we look at young birds, so birds that hatch in a given year in the summer, whenever we look at those young birds in the fall, such as the bottom right-hand photo here of this hatch year male, hatch year meaning that that bird hatched that year, we can instantly tell whether or not we're looking at a young bird or an adult bird. And one of the things that really stands out on young birds is their bill color. So the bill color of an adult cardinal is going to be bright red-orange, okay? So all of the other individuals shown on the screen, with the exception of the hatch year male at the bottom, are adult individuals. You can tell that the bottom right photo is a hatch year bird because its bill is not completely orange-red. It will probably acquire that coloration usually by January or February following the year in which they hatched. And both sexes are going to have a nice orange-red bill. There's no difference in this between the sexes. Okay, so birds put a lot of effort into this metabolic process, okay, in which they have really bright feathers. Why is that such a big deal? Why would we expect some birds to be brighter than others? Is this an important aspect to consider with the species? And a lot of research has shown that it is. Plumage coloration can actually tell a potential mate that it can tell a potential mate that this is a really good individual with which to mate with. Okay, some behavioral attributes have been correlated with different plumage patterns. For example, redder males had greater territories and were better territory defenders, or had better vegetation on their territories, which is important for nesting success. So if a female sees one of these bright males, this could potentially be telling her that this is an ideal mate because he will be a good provider. Some research has shown that darker face mask, again, this melanin pigment and ornament, has been correlated with aggressive behavior in some populations. In both sexes, redder individuals, whether it be the underwings of females or the breast color of males, has indicated that these individuals are better parents and that they provide more food to their offspring. Okay, so a little bit about the plumage for this species. It is an extremely important part of the species. I mean, they gave it the name, right, to indicate that nice red color. So let's talk a little bit about diet here. Since we mentioned that diet is so important for them to acquire their coloration, I wanted to take a few moments and talk about what cardinals eat and how they get those carotenoids. Where do they get them from? So the cardinal is going to be an omnivorous bird. It's an opportunistic feeder. And if you look at a picture of a cardinal, the first thing that usually stands out after you get past that red plumage is that really thick, dense bill. Okay. And trust me when I say, when a cardinal decides it wants to bite you after you have captured one, it really does hurt. You don't get used to it. Every single time I get chomped by a bird, I usually end up with a small bruise after it has let go. But that really super strong bill is really awesome for crushing seeds, okay? And those seeds being a good source of nutrition, the fruits that contain a lot of these seeds being a good source for carotenoids. Insects are also a good source of carotenoids, and while adults typically don't eat insects year-round, they will eat them during the spring and the summer while they are providing insects for their young. Okay, they will also eat a variety of fruit as it comes available. In the early spring, we will see the cardinal foraging a lot in open areas where we have wild seeds readily available. Whenever we start to see the lovely green canopy emerging, cardinals will eat buds and they will eat insect larvae, lots of caterpillars, on the trees and shrubs. They prefer broadleaf foliage as opposed to evergreens or conifers, because the deciduous plants will likely attract more insects. And they will go and check out your feeders throughout the day, but those of you who watch them know that you're most likely going to see the cardinal at dawn or at dusk. Some common foods that these guys eat will be anything from a variety of seeds available at a feeder, although black oil sunflower seeds are their favorite. They will eat caterpillars, they'll eat grapes, mulberry, dogwood, and they will eat cracked corn. I currently have cracked corn in my feeder at my home, and I see our cardinal pair checking it out from time to time. All right. Let's move on to the reason that I actually got really interested in this species, and it is because they are extremely territorial. Whenever we think about the behavior of male birds and female birds, typically folks will often think that the male does all the defending while the female basically just raises the young and lays eggs and protects the nest. And in cardinals are a little different because the female will also participate in a variety of territorial behavior. Both males and females will readily defend their turf, and they will defend their turf off and on throughout the entire year, which makes sense when you think about it, because this species is going to be here year-round, and if you have a territory that you're pleased with and it provides you with the resources that you need to be successful reproductively, you're not going to want to go from territory to territory each breeding season. So when cardinal pairs find a turf that they like, they stay there, they put up shop, and they will remain there usually unless something happens, like a member of the pair dies and another one moves in, or something happens to the territory quality. So how do they defend their territories? Well, the one way that they defend their territories is something that you all may have even heard this morning, is through song. Both sexes of cardinal will sing. Males typically sing a little bit more than females. Males are going to be the ones that you see up at the top of the trees singing their hearts out. Females also sing, and they sing similar songs as males. We'll talk about song in just a bit. In addition to singing, both sexes will fight. I have captured many cardinals in a wide variety of aggressive contexts where they've been attacking a decoy that we had on their territory. I've seen females fight with females. I've seen males fight with males. And I have seen pair members come in together to fight decoys before. So I recently just did a study where I found that males who were more likely to fight were often mated with females who were more likely to fight, and vice versa. If you didn't really want to fight, your mate didn't really fight either, which is interesting, and kind of leads to us the idea that maybe these pairs mate assortatively based on their behavioral tendencies. But this year-round territoriality that they display is going to be the strongest in the spring, as new young cardinals are moving through the area, and they are trying to find a territory, and they will often compete with territory owners to see if they can maybe usurp a position, and it often doesn't work out. But nonetheless, as the breeding season approaches, we're going to see a lot more territorial behavior. We'll see a lot more singing. We'll see a lot more fighting. We'll see a lot more chasing. I'm sure if any of you spent any time watching your feeders this spring, you certainly saw male cardinals fighting one another or chasing each other away from that. All right, and this is a fun little video clip that I took while working on my dissertation work, and I took it at a friend's backyard. She had a very territorial male who was attacking windows, attacking mirrors, and when males or females do that, it's because they see their reflection and they think it's a threat to their territory or to their mate. And I was just curious as to whether or not this particular angry male would attack this decoy that we set up in her yard, and well, I'll let you see and conclude. Yes, this individual was most unhappy at seeing that decoy in the yard, and we saw a wide variety of responses to our decoys whenever we would put them up. I wish my camera angle had been a little bit bigger a little bit wider whenever we took this footage, because off to the left, this male's female also came in with him. Sometimes whenever they would attack the decoy, and the decoy would do goofy things, kind of like what happened here where it got flipped over, the individuals would realize something wasn't right and they would move on. In some cases, we would have individuals come in who were not interested at all in attacking the decoy, but they would sing over it, hoping to drive it away, or they would chip at it, another call trying to indicate that, yes, I do see you and I'm not happy about it, but I'm not going to go and physically engage with you. And then in other cases, we saw situations where I had one bird who actually ripped our decoy's head off, which was super fun and required a lot of super glue to get it back on. But nonetheless, this is a highly territorial species that will fight and defend their territory off and on a year-round basis. So let's talk a little bit about song here. So cardinals produce song through most of the year. We don't hear them as much in the fall and in the winter, particularly in the fall, because that's when molt is occurring, and molt is a really expensive physiological process. But we do hear it usually bright and early in January, and which gives us a lot of hope for spring here in these long Wisconsin winters. Both sexes sing in this species, and they sing similar songs. The songs are actually fairly simple in structure, and what we're looking at here are sonographs of different syllables that cardinals make, and the syllables are typically a pure-toned whistle-like series of syllables. And to make their different songs, the variations in the songs are basically just rearrangements of the syllables, and both males and females will sing the same songs. The three widespread categories of song that we are most familiar with are going to be the what cheer, cheer, cheer song. Yes, I do this a lot. This is normal behavior for me. And then the ever popular, the cheer, cheer, what? And followed by the typical birdie, 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 birdie song that we often hear more of in the springtime, particularly with the dawn chorus. Song can be used to attract mates. Song can also be used to announce territory ownership. I have often heard males singing in bordering territories where they are matching the songs of their neighbor, which is an aggressive response indicating, this is my territory, you stay on your side and I'll stay on mine. I have a small clip here of Cardinal song if you do need a refresher. So this is the cheer, cheer, what, syllable arrangement. And basically all of these different songs that the Cardinals do sing are just rearrangements of the different syllables and the where the syllables fall in the song structure. Okay, regional dialects do occur. Cardinals in Louisiana sound a little bit differently than Cardinals in Wisconsin. And Cardinals do share a large proportion of their syllables and their song structure with their mates and their neighbors. As we move away from a region geographically, the songs will become less similar with increasing distance. And whenever we're thinking about this being used in a territorial way, the songs of neighbors are actually greater threats, considered greater threats to territory owners than those who are potential intruders that are not neighbors. So the neighbor that you know is actually considered a greater threat than the individual just cruising through and singing, who's probably not going to stick around very long. All right. We are right at the beginning of cardinal breeding season here in Wisconsin. Many of you might have had a pair raise a brood right outside your window, as cardinals will readily nest in shrubs and trees located near homes. Again, they like edge habitat, and suburban areas and parks within cities are fantastic examples of edge. Pair bonding behavior with this species will ramp up in February and March, and pairs typically will stay together through a breeding season. So one question that people ask me often are, do cardinals mate for life? And they do not. No bird really truly mates for life. Instead, they experience something that is referred to as serial monogamy, meaning that they will stay together, okay, through a breeding season, all right, unless something happens to one of the pair members, if somebody gets eaten by a predator or something like that. However, it is not uncommon to have pairs stay together for breeding season to breeding season to breeding season until something happens to one of the pair members. Okay, and just because they stay with the pair members doesn't necessarily mean that they don't necessarily mate with other individuals of other pairs, although it is really less in this species. We'll talk about that in a moment. But they are a serial monogamous species. Pairs do stay together. It's not nearly as romantic as sometimes we like to think about it, but they will stay together if they do have reproductive success together. Cardinals have a lengthy breeding season. They can have up to 8 nests a year, and the major reason for that is because they're open cup nesters, which means they are basically just sitting and waiting for a predator to eat the eggs and to eat the nestlings, and I'll talk about that in an upcoming slide. But most of them have 2 to 3 nests per year. If they have a couple of nests and they have reproductive success and those nestlings make it out of the nest, they fledge. Often pairs will go ahead and they will enter their fall molt and call it a day for that breeding season for that particular year. However, if they are denied reproductive success because predators keep eating the eggs or they keep eating the nestlings, then they will keep going. I once watched a female who had no reproductive success one year have up to 7 nests in the Deep South. So this breeding season, the breeding season in Wisconsin has already begun. I've already had a pair build and lose a nest in my backyard this year, the female is currently rebuilding. Females build the nest and they incubate the eggs. They can have anywhere from 1 to 5 eggs, although you typically see 2 to 3 eggs at a time. The males will feed the females on the nest, and both sexes will provide parental care. In fact, the males will actually provide more food in some pairs than the females. So the males are very attentive parents once the young have hatched. Up until then, the female does the lion's share of the work. Now, I mentioned prior that this idea that the birds are serially monogamous with one another, well, on occasion, there are individuals who do mate with other birds and other pairs. And the rate of extra pair fertilization, so a female basically having 1 or more of her eggs fertilized by different males, is fairly common in songbirds, but it's actually really low in really low in cardinals. Male cardinals do a really nice job of guarding females during fertile periods, and which results in most, if not all, of the nestlings in the nest being theirs from a DNA perspective. So about 9, there have been a couple studies that have looked at this to basically see if all of the babies in a nest belong to the dad that is feeding them. And they found that 9 to 35% of cardinal nestlings actually belong to other males. Okay, so that female mated with another male when she was fertile, and 1 or more of her eggs was fertilized by that particular male that is not her mate. However, this is really low in comparison to lots of other songbirds. So whenever we're thinking about, the pair being, for the most part, faithful to each other, it's more of a, you can argue more of a case for cardinals than you can for other songbirds. Okay. Now, let's talk about this phenomenon, which is actually really common during the cardinal breeding season, and actually the breeding seasons of lots of birds. So many of you, I'm sure, have seen the brown-headed cowbird before. And the brown-headed cowbird is a brood parasite. Okay, so a brood parasite is going to basically lay its eggs in the nest of another species, and then it's going to split and hope that the female will continue to incubate her nest with the egg inside of it that is not hers, as well as raise the nestling that is not hers if it does successfully hatch. Brown-headed cowbird, the brown-headed cowbird population in this country has dramatically increased over the past few decades, and it's almost driven a few songbird species into extinction. The degree to which we see brown-headed cowbirds putting their eggs inside a cardinal nest varies by location, and some parts of the country have more of a problem with this than others. Up in the top right here, we see a cardinal nest. The 2 eggs there that are larger and a nice cream color with speckles, those are going to be your cardinal eggs, and that smaller egg, that 3rd egg there, is going to be a brown-headed cowbird egg that was deposited when the female was off the nest. This particular female was really smart and ejected that egg and continued to incubate her eggs, and ended up actually fledging both of those nestlings successfully. Some females will recognize the egg and remove it. Some of them will not. Some of them will abandon the nest. Some of them will let it stick around and will let the egg hatch. And some of them will successfully raise a cowbird chick as well as their own cardinal nestlings. Overall, the brown-headed cowbird doesn't really have a lot of great nestling reproductive success with the species, because females will recognize that something's not right, and they will either eject the egg, they'll abandon the nest, or the entire nest will be eaten by something else, because cardinal nests really are one of the tastiest things for lots of predators during the spring. In fact, it's been calculated that the success rate of a brown-headed cowbird putting an egg in a nest and actually it becoming a fledgling is only about 5%. Okay, but I guess if you are doing this to all the nests in your neighborhood with hopes of getting some success, the strategy certainly pays off. Here we have the male and the female brown-headed cowbird here shown in the middle of the screen. And off at the bottom here, we see a photo of a male cardinal who is feeding this brown-headed cowbird fledgling, which he successfully fed in the nest, and he and his mate were able to raise it, and he's still feeding it as it makes its way through adulthood. All right, so I mentioned earlier that both these sexes provide parental care, and they do. They provide lots of parental care. The female is going to build the nest, and she's going to incubate the eggs. These are going to be open cup nesters, and we typically are going to see the first eggs laid every year in March or April. Nesting gets going a little bit later here at higher latitude than in the southern range of the species. However, we do have some interesting examples. The female in my yard who had a nest this year was actually kind of early. She had to sit through a couple of frosts, and in the end still ended up losing the egg. The female will sit on her 2 to 3 egg clutch for about 12 to 14 days. Okay, and all of the nestlings will hatch synchronously, so they'll all hatch on the same day. The nest itself is not going to be attached to a substrate. It's going to be wedged into position, and it's going to be a pretty traditional bowl-shaped structure that's really characteristic of open cup nest. And it's going to have a rough outer layer. It's going to have leaves in it. It's going to have some grapevine and some nice soft grassy lining. Those that are built in urban settings will often have paper and plastic wrapped into it as well. The male will feed the female on the nest, and the pair will actually communicate with each other while she is sitting on the nest or while she is feeding her young. They will sing to one another. They will call to one another. In many cases, if they see if there's a predator in the area, they will try to communicate with each other to prevent one or the other from drawing attention to the nest. Both sexes are going to feed the young. Males in many pairs will often provide more food than females. The youngs are going to eat insects, and this is going to be usually in the form of insect larvae. I have seen many young cardinals being fed big fat green caterpillars. They grow extremely rapidly. They're only in the nest about 10 to 12 days until they fledge. Everyone asks me, well, why do I have all these female cardinals around my feeder in the early fall or the late summer? And they're not all female. But the nestlings and the fledglings of cardinals are going to all look female as far as their plumage color. However, as the males start to eat greater variety of food, they will start to deposit those carotenoids into their feathers, and eventually they will develop that male plumage. So while they might all look female, which is actually really good from a camouflage perspective until the individual can protect itself, they are not all female. Many of these will have, after a few weeks out of the nest, will sort of adapt this sort of technicolor pattern to it, where it looks almost like it's been tie-dyed, where part of it'll be red, part of it'll be brown, and that is a male that is depositing those pigments into its feathers. All right, so do we have any other related species on the planet to cardinals? Well, cardinals are a member of family Cardinalidae, and it's going to be one of 3 species of the Cardinalis genus. The others being the Pyrloxia, which we see in the southwestern U.S. over on the right-hand side of the screen, and the other being the vermilion cardinal, which we will see in Venezuela and parts of Colombia. The Pyrloxia I have a friend of mine who is a fellow cardinal researcher who recently did a research project with Pyrrholoxia, and I was extremely jealous because I've always referred to these birds as sort of the frosted cardinals, because to me they look like they have frost over their red plumage. But these birds are only found in the southwestern U.S. and Mexico, and the females and males are going to be, they look different obviously from the Northern Cardinal because they have this frostiness appearance to their plumage. Their plumage is not entirely red as though a male cardinal would be. They have a shorter bill than Northern Cardinals, and it has a little bit of a decurved upper mandible. So there's a little bit more of a curve to that bill than what we do see in our Northern Cardinals. The male Pyrrholoxia also has that nice red patch around the base of its bill, where in the Northern Cardinal you see more of the black mask, and it also has some of those red colorations on the wings, which we don't necessarily see emphasized in the Northern Cardinal. The Vermilion Cardinal is a very bright scarlet colored bird with a really cool spiky crest and a really, really thick gray bill. If you look really close at this photo, you can tell that this particular guy has really enjoyed some fruit that was nearby. You can see the stains on his bill. The males are overall a brilliant red, and the females are darker and brown and gray. And a question folks have asked me before is, why do we see this sharp color difference between males and females? And it's because, it's believed to be because females would not want to be a bright red target sitting on a nest. Okay, males are very conspicuous. Females do not need to be so, particularly when their nests are so vulnerable to begin with. Okay, well, the Vermilion Cardinal is going to be found more in dry, arid parts of the world, desert scrub. It likes dry forests in the lowlands of Venezuela and Colombia. But nonetheless, if you look at pictures of cardinals and then you look at pictures of these two species here, you can definitely see how they are all grouped within the same family. All right, now here's some fun things that come up about cardinals every now and then, that if any of you have looked at any magazines, or actually some of these were actually on television, on news reports, you may have wondered what the heck is going on. So I thought I would take a couple minutes and talk about some of the cool stuff that cardinals give us the opportunity to talk about. So off to the top, to the right, we have yellow cardinals. So why do we get a yellow cardinal? He's a really cool looking cardinal. It is a male. What's going on here with this bird? And it's believed that these birds that have a yellow plumage pattern, it's believed that they have some type of metabolic deficiency. So as I mentioned prior, the birds will take the carotenoids that they eat in food, and they will basically send it down this metabolic pathway to where it will deposit those carotenoid pigments in the feathers in a red form. These yellow cardinals lack some of those enzymes that are necessary to convert those carotenoids into other colors past yellow. So they can take the carotenoids and they can convert them and deposit them in feathers, but they can't take them any further than yellow. The next question that I have gotten from lots of folks is about the cardinal on the bottom right that looks half male and half female. So this is really a neat specimen, and they pop up from time to time. And what has happened here is this is potentially a bilateral gynandromorph, okay, where we have red on the cardinal on one side and we have gray olive on the other, and the bird looks like it's almost been split in half. So gynandromorphs are an interesting phenomena in nature, sometimes referred to as half-siders, and we see them sometimes in birds, but we see it much more common in crustaceans and in some butterflies. And how this happens is it's believed that very early on in embryonic development, when we're talking about like 8 to 64 cells of an organism is being created, that basically both male and female chromosomes are present within a single fertilized egg. And what happens is half of the bird's body will contain cells that have male chromosomes driving male typical development on that half of the bird's body, and the other half will have cells with female chromosomes, which will drive that half of the bird's body down to the female typical pathway. Okay, these are very cool birds. There is a whole lot left to learn about them because we don't really have any specimens in hand to look at what is actually going on inside this bird, or to even look at it from a DNA perspective. But and there's just so few of them that research really can't be readily done with them. But nonetheless, it's a cool phenomenon that crops up from time to time. The last one, the bald bird, is probably something that all of you have seen, have at least seen pictures of, maybe even have seen these in your yard, because everybody who is a serious birder sees a bald bird at some point. It hasn't been closely studied, but it happens more often in birds that have crest. So blue jays and tufted titmice and cardinals. Sometimes these birds will occasionally look bald at the end of the summer, and we don't really know why, but it's believed that maybe an abnormal molt happened where birds typically lose feathers a few at a time. Well, something might have happened where all of the feathers on the head just were dumped at once. It's not really a costly phenomenon for the bird because they don't use these feathers for flying, but they do, it does give them a rather interesting appearance. Interestingly, it could be due to the bird having maybe excess feather mites or maybe feather lice that could contribute. Again, not a ton of research has been done on these birds because while it is fairly common, it's really hard to get a decent sample size when you're basically targeting birds that are bald. You do see them, but you don't see them in great numbers. The birds that do have this particular phenomena occurring, they will have a full head of feathers after they go through their fall molt. So this particular bird in hand here was a female cardinal that was captured years ago. She was fully bald when we caught her at the end of the summer. She was done with breeding. She was beginning to molt. We kept her in captivity for a couple of months to see what happened with this molt pattern that was going on here. And during the 2 months that she was in captivity, when we released her, she actually had a full crest and a full head of feathers. So whatever was occurring, was this an abnormal molt? Were there mites that we weren't aware of? We don't necessarily know. The bird did not seem to be uncomfortable. It was not constantly trying to scratch or claw at its feathers. And she had a beautiful crest whenever we let her go. Again, all of these weird, interesting phenomena or ripe avenues for research in the future, and maybe one day I'll get around to some of this. All right. Another thing folks ask me is, how do I attract cardinals? I love cardinals, and I very rarely ever see them at my feeder. Well, there's more to attracting birds in general than just putting a feeder out. Birds like to have a really nice habitat in which they can not only get food, but also get water, and do it in a place that they feel protected. So cardinals, again, like edge habitat. So attracting them is usually pretty easy if you have these criteria in place. Planting native shrubs and plants that fruit and attract insects is always good for cardinals. In addition, leaving leaf litter around for insect larvae to emerge in the spring is also a good idea because these guys will be looking for food to feed their young. Supplemental feeding, particularly in the fall and winter, is really a good idea here in Wisconsin, especially once the snow has covered the ground, because the birds have a really hard time finding food in the snowpack. So during the harsh Wisconsin winters, if you have a bird feeder, fill it up with black oil sunflower seeds, and you'll probably have cardinals visit it. Having a water source in a backyard is always a good idea. Bird baths or wildlife ponds are often visited by cardinals as well. Having places where birds can go to so that they feel protected is also a good idea. Having shrubs, having small trees will not only provide the birds a place to go if they sense danger nearby. And I have seen cardinals be attacked by hawks before at bird feeders. They're bright red plumage gives them away really easily. If they have a place they can duck and dive under, it makes them feel more secure and they're more likely to visit your feeders. But having those small shrubs and those small trees are also, it's a really great location for them to raise their young, because they like having those nicely, dense foliage to put their nest, to give them a little bit more protection since their nests are so vulnerable. Okay, and as I conclude, I would like to thank who has had the opportunity to listen to this talk. If you want to know more about this species or others, please take a couple moments to check out these websites, the All About Birds website and the Birds of the World website. Both of these are hosted by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. The Cornell Lab is sort of the mothership for all things bird, and you can find really fantastic information, photos, and song recordings at these locations. If you would like to contact me, if you have any specific questions about cardinals or other birds, I love other birds too, or have any stories you would like to share, I have had so many folks tell me some really awesome stories over the years, please feel free to email me at devriesm@uww.edu. So with that, thank you very much for listening, and happy birding.
Thank you so very much, Susan. That was so interesting. While you were talking, I had a few questions. Would you mind if I ask you a couple of questions?
Sure.
All right. I'm curious, how big is the usual territory of a pair of northerns or the northerns?
It depends upon the quality of the territory. So this is actually been the subject of several research studies, and they have found that birds that have really good nesting habitat, so lots of places to put a nest that they have good success with, they can get away without having a really huge territory, because the bigger the territory you have, that's more you have to defend. So if you've got a smaller area that has everything that you need to be successful, then that's going to be their option. It's all about energetics, right? We don't want to we don't want to expend more energy than necessary. So in areas where there have a lot of really great nesting habitat, like a lot of parks, you won't necessarily see huge territories. You'll see smaller ones, because these areas have been landscaped to basically provide success for local birds. But if you're in an area that, let's say, has had some logging occur recently or some timber's been cut, then you'll see birds having to hustle a little bit more because they've lost a lot of their resources and the territories have to get bigger.
Interesting. Okay. I've noticed in my front yard, and I've seen this several times, in the early spring, the male is feeding the female insects, the little grubs and things, worms, I don't know, but they always seem to be insects of some sort.
Yep.
And
Yes.
is this like a mating ritual?
It is. It's a courtship ritual.
Okay.
It's a courtship ritual. So as I mentioned before, the pairs, if they were successful together, usually will stick around, and they'll even stay on the same territory all year. They may not fight it as vigorously in the wintertime, because why? But in the spring, that female will usually still be around with that male, and that strengthens their pair bond. And that gets them ready in the mindset that breeding season is upon us. And it gets him also in practice of feeding other things, because he will be feeding offspring in the future. But the more you see pairs do that, the tighter their pair bonds will be, because they do have to be, it is a coordinated effort to defend your territory, but also to raise your young.
Yeah, interesting. I was also wondering, besides the good old house cat, what kind of predators does the nest of a cardinal have?
So predators can be mammal, or they can be other birds, or they can be reptiles. I have actually seen snakes in the nest of cardinals before.
Wow.
That was a real sweet treat when approaching a nest one day that I thought had nestlings in it, and I'm like, no, that's a rat snake. And just sort of backed away. I'm not the biggest fan of snakes from recreational standpoint. I certainly appreciate them from a biological standpoint, but my kids will never have a snake. So they will never have a snake in the house. But other birds are actually really big problems too. So one of the nests that I had in my yard already this year that failed, I'm pretty sure that egg was eaten by either a crow or a blue jay. Blue jays are actually really terrible with impacting nest success. So about 70% of cardinal nests don't make it.
Wow, that's huge.
Yep, that's why my dissertation took so long to finish. Because I looked at parental care, and I would need the nestlings to stay alive a certain length of time to get data on those days, and I would get there on the last day and something had eaten them. Chipmunks will take eggs. They won't necessarily impact nestlings all that much, but they'll take eggs. Raccoons will sometimes, and squirrels will, larger gray squirrels will sometimes impact the nest. When that happens, usually they destroy the nest. It's just a giant mess. But things like blue jays and crows and even snakes, whenever they go and they remove things, the nest is perfectly intact. It's just empty. It's just empty.
Interesting. Well, this has been so interesting, and I think most people who feed the backyard birds and try to provide a little habitat for them, cardinals are probably, for the most part, our favorites. So this was so interesting. Thank you so much for your time and all this great information. I think we'll go home and really relook at what we're doing in my yard.
Excellent. Well, you should be seeing, hopefully by the end of the summer, everybody will be seeing some fledglings that are hanging out around their feeders. So again, thank you very much for the opportunity. Once we get back into more normal times, I would love for the opportunity to come and actually show some of my research tools that I use in person, how I catch cardinals, how I band them, and things like that. But until then, if anybody has any questions, feel free to forward them to me. I'd be more than happy to answer them.
Well, wonderful. We will plan on having you back again because this was so interesting. I'm sure many of us want to learn more. Excellent. So thank you, Susan, and you have a lovely rest of your day.
You too. Bye-bye, folks.
Bye-bye.